Welcome to the channel. Today, we take you on a fascinating journey through the Tudor dynasty, covering Henry VII, Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I in just 80 minutes. Discover their triumphs, scandals, and lasting legacy as we explore how they shaped England's history forever. Let's begin. The Tudors, a history in 80 minutes. The lives, reigns, and legacy of England's Tudor monarchs. Part 1. The Rise of the Tudors. The Tudor dynasty emerged from the ashes of one of England's most brutal and prolonged conflicts, the Wars of the Roses. The struggle between the rival houses of Lancaster and York had left the kingdom in turmoil, with kings deposed, families shattered, and the nobility divided. It was in this chaotic landscape that a young Welsh nobleman named Henry Tudor began his unlikely journey to the English throne. Henry was born in 1457 to Margaret Beaufort, a descendant of John of Gaunt, son of Edward III, and Edmund Tudor, a half-brother to King Henry VI. His claim to the throne was weak by traditional standards, as it came through the illegitimate Beaufort line. However, with most Lancastrian claimants dead or displaced, Henry's position grew stronger as he became the last significant hope for those opposing Yorkist rule. For much of his early life, Henry lived in exile in Brittany, avoiding the grasp of the Yorkist kings Edward IV and Richard III. The death of Edward IV in 1483 set off a dramatic chain of events that ultimately led Henry back to England. Richard III, Edward's brother, seized the throne in a controversial move, declaring Edward's sons illegitimate and imprisoning them in the Tower of London. The disappearance of these young princes remains one of history's greatest mysteries, casting a dark shadow over Richard's reign. Discontent with Richard III's rule spread quickly, and many nobles sought an alternative claimant to challenge his position. Henry Tudor, though still in exile, became the focus of this growing opposition, gaining the support of disillusioned Yorkists and Lancastrians alike. In 1485, with financial and military backing from France, Henry landed in Wales, gathering troops as he marched towards Richard III's forces. The two armies met at Bosworth Field on August 22, 1485, in a battle that would determine the future of England. Richard III, despite having numerical superiority, struggled with divided loyalties among his commanders. The turning point came when Lord Stanley, whose allegiance had been uncertain, chose to side with Henry, leading his forces in a decisive charge against Richard. The Yorkist king fought valiantly but was ultimately killed on the battlefield, becoming the last English monarch to die in combat. With Richard's death, Henry was declared King Henry VII, marking the beginning of the Tudor dynasty. His victory at Bosworth was not merely a triumph of arms but a carefully orchestrated political maneuver that united former enemies under his rule. However, securing the throne was only the first step. Henry needed to consolidate power and prevent further challenges to his reign. Understanding the fragile nature of his position, Henry took swift action to solidify his claim. He married Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV, thereby uniting the warring houses of Lancaster and York in a symbolic gesture of reconciliation. This marriage effectively ended the Wars of the Roses, giving England a sense of stability after decades of civil war. The Tudor rose, combining the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York, became the emblem of this new era. Despite these efforts, Henry's early reign was far from secure. Pretenders and rival claimants emerged, seeking to undermine his authority. One of the most notable threats came from Lambert Simnel, a young boy presented as the Earl of Warwick, a legitimate Yorkist heir. With the backing of Yorkist supporters and foreign allies, Simnel's forces clashed with Henry's army at the Battle of Stokefield in 1487. Henry emerged victorious, putting an end to the last major engagement of the Wars of the Roses. Another pretender, Perkin Warbeck, claimed to be Richard, Duke of York, one of the missing princes in the Tower. Warbeck's challenge persisted for years, gaining the support of European courts and attempting multiple invasions. However, Henry's intelligence network and strategic diplomacy allowed him to dismantle these threats, eventually capturing and executing Warbeck in 1499. Beyond military victories, Henry VII focused on securing his dynasty through careful governance and international diplomacy. He strengthened royal authority by controlling the nobility, employing financial policies that reduced their power while increasing the wealth of the crown. His approach to taxation and trade allowed England to recover economically, laying the foundations for the stability that would define the Tudor era. By the time of Henry VII's death in 1509, he had transformed England from a fractured kingdom into a relatively stable realm, setting the stage for his son, Henry VIII, to inherit a secure throne. The legacy of Henry's rise was not just in the battles he fought but in the political acumen that enabled the Tudors to rule for over a century. Part 2. Henry VII, the architect of a dynasty. Henry VII's victory at Bosworth in 1485 was just the beginning of his journey as king. Though he had claimed the throne through battle, ruling a deeply divided England required a far more delicate balance of strategy, diplomacy, and governance. His reign was marked by an unrelenting effort to consolidate power, secure the Tudor dynasty, and establish financial stability, all while navigating the persistent threats of rebellion and foreign intrigue. One of Henry's first and most crucial steps was legitimizing his claim. Despite his victory, he knew that his bloodline alone was not enough to silence opposition. His marriage to Elizabeth of York in 1486 was not just a union of two individuals but a powerful symbol of reconciliation between the warring houses of Lancaster and York. By blending these rival factions, Henry sought to heal the divisions that had plagued England for decades. The Tudor Rose, a fusion of the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York, became the enduring emblem of this new unity. However, marriage alone did not guarantee security. Henry understood that the greatest threats to his rule came from rival claimants. His reign was quickly challenged by pretenders, the most notable being Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck. Simnel, a mere boy, was presented by Yorkist supporters as the Earl of Warwick, a genuine Yorkist heir who had been imprisoned by Henry. The deception gained traction, and Simnel was crowned King Edward VI in Dublin, backed by Irish forces and foreign allies. Henry, however, crushed the rebellion at the Battle of Stokefield in 1487, a decisive moment that secured his grip on the throne. Unlike his predecessors who might have ordered Simnel's execution, Henry showed a calculated restraint. He spared the boy and put him to work in the royal kitchens, demonstrating both his authority and his ability to neutralize threats without unnecessary cruelty. Warbeck, on the other hand, posed a far more serious challenge. Claiming to be Richard, Duke of York, one of the lost princes in the Tower, Warbeck gained support from Burgundy, Scotland, and even elements of the English nobility. His ability to maintain a rebellion for several years reflected the ongoing instability of Henry's rule. Yet, through a combination of espionage, diplomacy, and military force, Henry outmaneuvered Warbeck, capturing him in 1497 and executing him 2 years later. This victory reinforced Henry's reputation as a king who could withstand and suppress rebellion, securing his dynasty's future. Beyond dealing with rivals, Henry's reign was characterized by financial prudence and administrative reforms. He understood that a wealthy and stable monarchy was crucial to maintaining control, and so he pursued policies that strengthened the crown's financial position. Through careful taxation, fines, and trade agreements, he restored royal coffers that had been drained by the Wars of the Roses. His most infamous financial instrument was the Council Learned in the Law, a body responsible for enforcing royal debts and collecting fines. While effective, it also made Henry deeply unpopular among the nobility, who resented his strict financial control. Henry's foreign policy was similarly calculated, prioritizing alliances that would enhance his position rather than entangle England in costly wars. His marriage negotiations were particularly significant, as he sought to secure favorable unions for his children. The marriage of his eldest son, Arthur, to Catherine of Aragon in 1501 was a diplomatic triumph, solidifying an alliance with Spain, one of the most powerful nations in Europe. However, Arthur's sudden death in 1502 threatened this alliance, leading Henry to arrange for Catherine to marry his second son, Henry, the future Henry VIII? Despite his financial successes and political maneuvering, Henry VII's later years were marked by increasing paranoia and suspicion. The loss of his beloved wife, Elizabeth of York, in 1503 deeply affected him, and he became increasingly reclusive and distrustful of those around him. His obsession with wealth and control led to harsher taxation policies, further alienating the nobility. Yet, his ability to maintain peace and stability ensured that England was in a far stronger position than when he had first seized the throne. By the time of Henry's death in 1509, he had transformed the monarchy into a more centralized and financially robust institution. His careful governance laid the foundation for the Tudor dynasty's long reign, though his methods, particularly his financial policies, left a mixed legacy. Some saw him as a shrewd and effective ruler, while others viewed him as a miserly king who burdened his subjects with excessive taxation. Regardless of opinion, his achievements in securing the throne, neutralizing threats, and stabilizing England were undeniable. As his son Henry VIII prepared to take the throne, England stood on the brink of a new era. The stability Henry VII had fought so hard to establish would soon be tested by his ambitious and headstrong successor, whose reign would bring both glory and turmoil to the Tudor dynasty. Part 3. Henry VIII, the Renaissance prince turned tyrant. When Henry VIII ascended the throne in 1509, he was everything England wanted in a king. Young, athletic, and charismatic, he was a stark contrast to his cautious and calculating father. At just 17 years old, he embodied the ideals of Renaissance kingship, fluent in multiple languages, skilled in jousting and hunting, and passionate about music and theology. His accession was met with great celebration, and for the first years of his reign, he seemed destined to be a noble and enlightened ruler. One of his first acts as king was to distance himself from the unpopular financial policies of his father. He ordered the arrest and execution of Henry VII's chief financial enforcers, Empson and Dudley, signaling that his reign would be one of generosity and fairness. He lavished money on tournaments, feasts, and grand building projects, eager to establish himself as a magnificent monarch in the tradition of European rulers like Francis I of France and Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. However, beneath the surface of this golden image lay a man driven by deep insecurities and an insatiable desire for control. Henry's early reign was dominated by his pursuit of military glory. Unlike his father, who had avoided war at all costs, Henry was determined to prove himself on the battlefield. He waged an ambitious campaign against France in 1513, winning the Battle of the Spurs and capturing the town of Tournai. Though these victories were more symbolic than strategically significant, they fed Henry's desire to be seen as a warrior king. At home, his rule was supported by his closest advisor, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, who effectively governed England while Henry focused on matters of war and pleasure. For the first 2 decades of his reign, Henry's court was one of splendor and extravagance. He surrounded himself with scholars, artists, and musicians, promoting the ideals of the Renaissance. He built magnificent palaces such as Hampton Court, hosted elaborate feasts, and engaged in intellectual debates on theology and philosophy. Yet, despite this cultured image, his personal life would become the source of scandal and political upheaval. Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, his brother Arthur's widow, was initially a strong and affectionate union. Catherine was highly intelligent and politically astute, and for many years she was a valued partner in Henry's reign. However, their inability to produce a male heir became an obsession for Henry. By the late 1520s, with only one surviving daughter, Mary, Henry was convinced that his marriage was cursed by God. His attention turned to Anne Boleyn, a charismatic and ambitious lady-in-waiting who refused to become his mistress, insisting on marriage instead. What followed was one of the most significant events in English history, the break from the Catholic Church. When Pope Clement VII refused to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine, Henry took matters into his own hands. With the help of reformist thinkers and his new advisor, Thomas Cromwell, he declared himself supreme head of the Church of England in 1534. This act not only allowed him to marry Anne Boleyn but also reshaped the religious landscape of England, severing ties with Rome and leading to the dissolution of monasteries. The wealth seized from these religious institutions greatly enriched the crown, further cementing Henry's authority. Despite his triumph in securing the annulment, Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn quickly soured. She, too, failed to provide him with a longed-for male heir, giving birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1533. By 1536, Anne had fallen out of favor, and Henry, growing increasingly ruthless, accused her of adultery and treason. She was executed that same year, marking the beginning of a pattern: Henry's willingness to eliminate those who no longer served his interests. Over the course of his reign, Henry would marry 6 times, each marriage reflecting his shifting political and personal needs. His third wife, Jane Seymour, gave him a son, Edward, but died shortly after childbirth. His fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves, arranged for political reasons, ended in swift annulment when Henry found her unattractive. His fifth wife, Catherine Howard, was executed for alleged infidelity, and his final wife, Catherine Parr, survived him, acting as a stabilizing influence in his later years. As Henry aged, he became increasingly paranoid and tyrannical. His once athletic frame gave way to obesity, worsened by a leg injury that never fully healed. His court became a place of intrigue and fear, with nobles and advisors constantly falling in and out of favor. Once loyal servants like Thomas Cromwell were executed on Henry's orders, demonstrating his unpredictable nature. The dissolution of the monasteries had made him immensely wealthy, but it also created unrest, leading to uprisings like the Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536, which he brutally suppressed. By the time of his death in 1547, Henry had transformed England forever. His creation of the Church of England laid the groundwork for centuries of religious conflict, while his political and military ambitions had reshaped the monarchy's role. His children, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, would inherit a nation deeply divided by religious and political strife, a direct consequence of Henry's reign. Though he had once been the Golden Prince of England, Henry VIII is remembered as one of history's most complex and controversial rulers, a man of great achievements and great destruction. Part 4. The Reformation and Religious Upheaval. The English Reformation was one of the most profound transformations in the nation's history. What began as Henry VIII's personal quest for a male heir evolved into a sweeping religious and political revolution that shattered England's centuries-old ties with Rome. The consequences of this break would reverberate for generations, fueling unrest, rebellion, and a deep division in English society. When Henry VIII declared himself supreme head of the Church of England in 1534, it was a radical assertion of royal authority over religious matters. No English king had ever dared to defy the Pope so openly, and the implications of this act extended far beyond his desire to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. The Act of Supremacy not only severed England's connection to the Catholic Church but also placed all religious institutions under the control of the Crown. Henry's move was met with resistance from loyal Catholics, but he swiftly crushed opposition, executing high-profile figures like Sir Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher. His message was clear: loyalty to the Pope would not be tolerated. With Henry's supremacy established, his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, set about dismantling England's vast network of monasteries. These institutions, which had stood for centuries as centers of religious life, education, and charity, were accused of corruption and greed. Under the dissolution of the monasteries, 1536 to 1541, hundreds of religious houses were closed, their lands and wealth confiscated by the Crown. This act transformed England's social and economic landscape, enriching the monarchy while displacing thousands of monks, nuns, and lay people who depended on these institutions for their livelihoods. The destruction of monasteries also sparked resistance, most notably the Pilgrimage of Grace, a large-scale uprising in northern England that was brutally suppressed. Despite Henry's assertion of control, religious tensions in England did not disappear, they only deepened. Henry remained doctrinally conservative, retaining many Catholic traditions even as he rejected papal authority. His 6 Articles of 1539 reaffirmed Catholic beliefs like transubstantiation and clerical celibacy, frustrating those who had hoped for a more radical Protestant reform. While Protestantism was gaining ground in Europe, Henry's England remained in a delicate religious limbo, neither fully Catholic nor fully Protestant. The true test of the Reformation came after Henry's death in 1547, when his 9-year-old son, Edward VI, ascended the throne. Under the guidance of his Protestant advisers, particularly the Duke of Somerset and later the Duke of Northumberland, England underwent its most sweeping religious changes yet. The Book of Common Prayer, introduced by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer in 1549, replaced Latin services with English and redefined church rituals in a more Protestant manner. Catholic images, altars, and practices were removed, and priests were allowed to marry. These reforms marked England's first real embrace of Protestantism, yet they were deeply unpopular among conservative Catholics, leading to widespread unrest, including the Western Rebellion of 1549. Edward's reign was short, and his death in 1553 at just 15 years old threw England into turmoil. His Protestant advisers, desperate to prevent the country from returning to Catholicism, attempted to place Lady Jane Grey on the throne. However, their plot quickly collapsed, and Edward's half-sister, Mary I, seized power with the support of the people. Mary's reign, 1553 to 1558, was defined by her fervent efforts to undo the Reformation and restore England to the Catholic fold. A devout Catholic, she repealed Edward's Protestant laws and reunited England with the papacy, determined to eradicate what she saw as heretical corruption. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain, the most powerful Catholic monarch in Europe, reinforced her religious mission but also made her deeply unpopular. Many feared England would become a satellite of the Spanish Empire, and resentment grew. Mary's most infamous policy was her persecution of Protestants, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. Under her rule, nearly 300 Protestants, including bishops, clergy, and commoners, were burned at the stake for heresy. The executions, particularly those recorded in John Foxe's Book of Martyrs, left a lasting impression on England's religious psyche, turning many against Catholicism rather than winning them back. Mary's harsh methods failed to secure Catholic dominance, and her reign ended in failure when she died childless in 1558. Her successor, Elizabeth I, would inherit a kingdom deeply divided by decades of religious upheaval. The challenge before her was immense: how to navigate the religious tensions that had torn England apart and forge a new path forward. Part 5. Elizabeth I and the Elizabethan Settlement. When Elizabeth I ascended the throne in 1558, England was a nation exhausted by religious turmoil, political instability, and economic uncertainty. The daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth had spent much of her early life under suspicion, viewed as illegitimate by Catholic factions and a potential rival by her half-sister, Mary I. Her rise to power was met with both hope and apprehension. Could she stabilize a fractured kingdom and forge a lasting peace between Catholics and Protestants? From the outset, Elizabeth understood that her reign would be defined by how she handled the religious divide. England had swung violently between Protestantism and Catholicism under her predecessors, leaving the population deeply divided. Unlike Mary I, who had pursued a rigid Catholic revival, or Edward VI, whose Protestant reforms had alienated traditionalists, Elizabeth sought a middle way. She was determined to secure her own authority while preventing further bloodshed over religious differences. The cornerstone of her religious policy was the Elizabethan Religious Settlement of 1559. This set of laws re-established Protestantism as the official faith of England but retained certain Catholic traditions to appeal to both sides. The Act of Supremacy restored Elizabeth as Supreme Governor of the Church of England, a title deliberately chosen to avoid the harsher Supreme Head used by her father. This allowed Catholics, who rejected a monarch as head of the Church, to more easily accept her rule. The Act of Uniformity mandated the use of a revised Book of Common Prayer, ensuring that church services followed a standardized Protestant format while still incorporating elements familiar to former Catholics. While Elizabeth's settlement was designed to be inclusive, it was not without opposition. Hardline Protestants, known as Puritans, believed the Church of England was still too Catholic and demanded further reforms. Meanwhile, Catholic recusants, those who refused to attend Protestant services, remained loyal to the Pope and viewed Elizabeth as a heretic. Though Elizabeth was personally more moderate in her religious beliefs, she had little patience for those who openly challenged her authority. Those who refused to conform faced fines, imprisonment, and, in extreme cases, execution. Despite her efforts at compromise, Elizabeth's reign was threatened by Catholic plots from within and abroad. The most persistent danger came from Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's Catholic cousin and the next in line to the English throne. Mary's claim made her a rallying point for Catholic factions, and when she was forced to flee Scotland in 1568, she sought refuge in England. Elizabeth, aware of the risk Mary posed, kept her under house arrest for nearly 20 years. Catholic conspiracies, including the Ridolfi Plot, 1571, the Throckmorton Plot, 1583, and the Babington Plot, 1586, all aimed to overthrow Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne. Eventually, under pressure from her advisors, Elizabeth reluctantly agreed to Mary's execution in 1587, a decision that eliminated a major threat but also angered Catholic monarchs across Europe. Elizabeth's cautious yet firm religious policy extended to her dealings with foreign powers. The greatest challenge to her reign came from Spain, the leading Catholic power in Europe. Philip II, once Elizabeth's brother-in-law through his marriage to Mary I, had long viewed her as an illegitimate usurper. Her support for Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, coupled with her authorization of English privateers like Sir Francis Drake to raid Spanish ships, escalated tensions between the two nations. In 1588, these tensions culminated in Philip's attempt to invade England with the Spanish Armada. The Armada, a vast fleet of 130 ships, was meant to overthrow Elizabeth and restore Catholic rule. However, a combination of poor planning, English naval superiority, and devastating storms led to Spain's humiliating defeat. The victory was a defining moment in Elizabeth's reign, solidifying her status as a powerful and divinely favored monarch. It also marked the beginning of England's rise as a dominant naval power, setting the stage for future imperial expansion. Though religion and war defined much of Elizabeth's rule, her reign also saw an extraordinary flourishing of culture and exploration. The period became known as the Elizabethan Age, a golden era of literature, drama, and discovery. Writers such as William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Edmund Spenser transformed English literature, while explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake ventured across the Atlantic, laying the foundations for England's future colonial empire. Despite her many successes, Elizabeth's reign was not without difficulties. Economic hardship, food shortages, and social unrest troubled the later years of her rule. The question of succession also loomed over her court. She famously never married, earning the title the Virgin Queen. Whether this decision was out of personal conviction, political strategy, or a reluctance to share power remains a topic of debate. What is certain is that her unmarried status allowed her to maintain absolute authority, free from the influence of a husband. When Elizabeth died in 1603, she left behind a transformed England, stronger, more unified, and poised to become a major world power. Her religious settlement had created a foundation for the Church of England that would endure, albeit with continued struggles. Though she had no direct heir, she had carefully prepared for a peaceful succession, and the English throne passed smoothly to her cousin, James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. Elizabeth's 45-year reign remains one of the most celebrated in English history. She had navigated religious strife, foreign threats, and internal conspiracies with remarkable skill, leaving a legacy of stability, cultural achievement, and national pride. England, once a vulnerable and divided kingdom, had emerged as a powerful and self-assured nation, ready to shape the course of world history in the centuries to come. Part 6. The Tudor Legacy and the Dawn of the Stuarts. When Elizabeth I took her final breath on March 24, 1603, the Tudor dynasty came to an end. For over a century, Tudor monarchs had shaped England's political, religious, and cultural landscape, leaving behind a transformed kingdom. Yet, the end of Tudor rule did not signal an abrupt change. Instead, the transition to the Stuart dynasty built upon the foundations laid by the Tudors. Elizabeth's death left England without a direct Tudor heir. Though she had steadfastly refused to name a successor during her lifetime, careful political maneuvering ensured a peaceful transfer of power. The throne passed to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland under a single monarch. This moment marked the beginning of the Stuart era, but the legacy of Tudor rule still loomed large over England's governance, religion, and identity. Perhaps the most enduring impact of the Tudors was the establishment of a strong, centralized monarchy. When Henry VII had seized the throne in 1485, England was a fractured land plagued by noble feuds. Over the course of Tudor rule, the monarchy had asserted dominance over rebellious barons, religious institutions, and even Parliament. By the time James I took the throne, the English monarchy was stronger than ever, a direct result of Tudor consolidation of power. However, this newfound authority would soon be tested, as tensions between the monarchy and Parliament began to simmer. Religiously, the Tudor era had left England deeply divided. The Elizabethan religious settlement had provided a measure of stability, but tensions between Protestants and Catholics remained. Many Catholics still viewed James I with suspicion, hoping that he might restore England to the Catholic faith. At the same time, radical Protestants, known as Puritans, sought further reforms to rid the Church of England of its lingering Catholic influences. The religious conflicts that had defined Tudor rule had not ended with Elizabeth's death. They had merely evolved into new challenges for the Stuart monarchy. One of the most immediate threats to James I's rule came from a group of disaffected Catholics who felt betrayed by his failure to grant them greater religious freedoms. Their frustrations culminated in the infamous Gunpowder Plot of 1605, in which a group of conspirators, led by Guy Fawkes, attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament and assassinate the king. The plot was foiled, reinforcing England's deep suspicion of Catholicism and solidifying Protestant dominance. The Tudors had set England on an irreversible Protestant trajectory, and the Stuarts would be forced to navigate the tensions that came with it. Beyond politics and religion, the Tudor dynasty had left an indelible mark on England's cultural and intellectual life. The Elizabethan age had seen an explosion of literature, drama, and exploration, producing figures like William Shakespeare, Francis Bacon, and Sir Walter Raleigh. These achievements continued into the Stuart era, as England's literary and scientific advancements flourished under James I's patronage. The King James Bible, commissioned by James in 1604 and completed in 1611, became one of the most influential texts in English history, a lasting testament to the religious and linguistic legacy of the Tudors. The Tudors had also laid the groundwork for England's expansion beyond its borders. Henry VII had cautiously supported overseas exploration, while Henry VIII had bolstered England's naval power. Under Elizabeth I, adventurers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh had begun to establish England's presence in the New World. By the time James I took the throne, the first permanent English colony, Jamestown, had been founded in Virginia in 1607, signaling the dawn of England's colonial ambitions. This expansionist mindset, fostered under Tudor rule, would eventually lead to the rise of the British Empire. However, not all aspects of Tudor rule left England in a position of strength. Economic difficulties plagued the late Tudor period, with rising inflation, food shortages, and social unrest becoming increasingly common. Elizabeth I had spent vast sums on war, particularly against Spain, leaving her successor with financial difficulties. James I inherited a nation struggling with debt, a problem that would later contribute to the growing conflicts between the monarchy and Parliament. The relationship between the monarchy and Parliament was another unresolved issue from the Tudor era. Though Henry VIII and Elizabeth I had wielded near-absolute authority, they had relied on Parliament to pass key legislation, particularly in religious matters. Under the Stuarts, the question of royal authority versus parliamentary power would escalate into open conflict, ultimately leading to the English Civil War in the mid-17th century. The Tudors had strengthened the monarchy, but in doing so, they had also created tensions that would eventually challenge its supremacy. Despite these challenges, the Tudors had set England on a path toward national identity and unity. The Wars of the Roses had left England deeply fragmented, but through strong leadership and decisive action, the Tudors had forged a sense of English nationalism. By the time James I took the throne, England was no longer a collection of feuding noble houses but a unified kingdom with a distinct identity, bolstered by Protestantism, a powerful monarchy, and a growing sense of cultural pride. The transition from Tudor to Stuart rule was not a sudden break but rather a continuation of many of the trends set in motion during the 16th century. The Tudors had reshaped England in ways that would be felt for centuries to come, politically, religiously, and culturally. As James I settled into his reign, he inherited both the strengths and the weaknesses of Tudor governance, and the challenges that lay ahead would test whether the foundations built by the Tudors could withstand the pressures of the evolving world. When the Tudor era ended, England stood at the threshold of a new age, one where the monarchy would face its greatest trials yet. The Tudor legacy was one of transformation, conflict, and consolidation, but whether the Stuarts could maintain the stability the Tudors had fought to achieve remained an open question. Part 7. The impact of Tudor rule on modern Britain. The Tudor dynasty may have ended in 1603, but its influence has continued to shape Britain in profound ways. From the establishment of Protestantism to the development of a centralized government, the policies and decisions of the Tudor monarchs left a lasting imprint on the nation's identity, institutions, and global standing. Many of the structures that define Britain today, its legal system, monarchy, religious establishment, and cultural traditions, can trace their origins back to the Tudor era. One of the most significant legacies of the Tudors is the Church of England. The English Reformation, initiated by Henry VIII's break with Rome in the 1530s, permanently altered the religious landscape of the country. While his motivations were largely personal and political, the consequences of his actions reshaped England's faith, creating a distinctly English Protestant identity that would persist through the centuries. Elizabeth I's religious settlement of 1559 further cemented Protestantism as the foundation of England's religious life, striking a balance between Catholic traditions and Protestant doctrine. Today, the Church of England remains the country's official church, with the British monarch still serving as its supreme governor, a direct legacy of Henry VIII's assertion of royal authority over religion. Beyond religion, the Tudors played a crucial role in the evolution of the English monarchy. Before Henry VII's rise to power in 1485, England had been plagued by noble feuds and weak central leadership. The Tudors redefined kingship, establishing the monarchy as the dominant force in governance. By the time of Elizabeth I's death, the idea of a strong, centralized government with the monarch at its head was firmly ingrained in English politics. This legacy endured well into the modern era, influencing how Britain's constitutional system developed. Even today, while the monarchy has lost much of its absolute power, the British royal family continues to play a symbolic and cultural role in national life, a testament to the enduring legacy of Tudor authority. The Tudors also laid the groundwork for England's legal and administrative systems. Henry VII's reign saw significant reforms aimed at curbing the power of the nobility and strengthening royal control. His use of the Star Chamber, a powerful royal court, helped establish the principle that the king's justice was supreme. Henry VIII and Elizabeth I further developed the civil service, expanding the role of royal councils and bureaucracies to manage the growing complexities of the state. These developments paved the way for modern governance, setting precedents for a professional administration and a structured legal system that continues to function in Britain today. The rise of Parliament's influence is another Tudor-era development that shaped Britain's future. While the Tudors often ruled with near-absolute authority, they also relied on Parliament to pass key legislation, particularly in matters of religion and taxation. Henry VIII, for example, used Parliament to legitimize his break with Rome, while Elizabeth I depended on parliamentary support to secure funding for her wars against Spain. This precedent, where the monarch needed the approval of Parliament to enact significant policies, would eventually lead to the constitutional struggles of the Stuart period and, much later, the establishment of a parliamentary democracy. Today, the British political system remains a constitutional monarchy, where the monarch reigns but does not rule, a balance shaped by the Tudor era. The Tudors also contributed to the expansion of England's global influence, setting the stage for the British Empire. Henry VII cautiously encouraged exploration, while Henry VIII strengthened the navy, laying the foundation for England's future maritime power. Under Elizabeth I, England took its first major steps toward overseas expansion, with figures like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh embarking on voyages of discovery and conquest. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 solidified England's naval supremacy, a dominance that would enable the country to become a global power in the centuries that followed. The ambitions sparked during the Tudor era ultimately led to the establishment of British colonies across the world, shaping the course of history far beyond England's borders. The impact of Tudor rule is also evident in Britain's cultural heritage. The Elizabethan era, in particular, saw a flourishing of literature, drama, and the arts. Writers such as William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Edmund Spenser transformed English literature, producing works that remain widely studied and performed today. Shakespeare's plays, filled with political intrigue, human drama, and reflections on power, often drew inspiration from Tudor history, further cementing the dynasty's influence on British culture. The Renaissance ideals that flourished under the Tudors also laid the foundation for Britain's intellectual and artistic traditions, shaping its cultural identity for generations to come. Economically, the Tudors implemented policies that helped transition England from a feudal society to a more market-driven economy. Henry VII's focus on trade and commerce strengthened England's financial stability, while Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries redistributed wealth and land, creating a new class of landowning gentry. The expansion of wool production and overseas trade during the Tudor era laid the groundwork for England's emergence as a commercial power. These economic shifts, though sometimes disruptive, helped modernize England's economy and contributed to its long-term growth. Even in the daily lives of ordinary people, the influence of the Tudors can still be felt. Many of the customs, traditions, and social structures that define British society today have their roots in the Tudor period. The standardization of the English language, the development of an early postal system, and the establishment of national symbols such as the Tudor rose all contributed to a growing sense of English identity. The Tudor period also saw the origins of state-funded education, with the foundation of grammar schools that provided schooling to a broader segment of society, a practice that would later evolve into Britain's modern education system. While the Tudors are often remembered for their dramatic reigns, personal scandals, and larger-than-life personalities, their true legacy lies in the profound changes they brought to England. They laid the foundations for a strong and centralized state, established religious traditions that persist to this day, and set England on a course toward global power. The political, religious, and cultural shifts of the Tudor era shaped the Britain we know today, proving that the impact of this remarkable dynasty extends far beyond the 16th century. Part 8. The Personal Lives of the Tudor Monarchs. The Tudors were not only powerful rulers but also fascinating individuals whose personal lives shaped their reigns and the course of English history. Behind the grandeur of courtly ceremonies and the weight of governance, they were human, filled with desires, ambitions, fears, and personal struggles. Their marriages, family dynamics, friendships, and rivalries often played a direct role in shaping national policy and political alliances. Henry VII, the first Tudor monarch, was a reserved and calculating man, deeply affected by his years in exile before seizing the throne in 1485. Unlike the larger-than-life kings who would follow him, Henry VII was cautious, preferring diplomacy and financial prudence over war and extravagance. His marriage to Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV, was carefully orchestrated to unite the feuding houses of Lancaster and York, bringing an end to the Wars of the Roses. By all accounts, theirs was a successful political union that also developed into a genuine partnership. Elizabeth bore Henry several children, but their greatest loss came in 1502 when their eldest son, Arthur, Prince of Wales, died suddenly at the age of 15. This death not only devastated the royal family but also changed the course of history, as it meant Arthur's younger brother, Henry, would become heir to the throne, setting the stage for the tumultuous reign of Henry VIII. If Henry VII was measured and reserved, Henry VIII was his opposite, a larger-than-life figure who dominated every aspect of his court. He was a man of immense energy, charm, and intellect, who excelled in everything from jousting and hunting to music and theology. But his personal life was notoriously turbulent, defined by his 6 marriages, each of which carried profound political and religious consequences. His first marriage, to Catherine of Aragon, was meant to solidify England's alliance with Spain, but after years of failing to produce a male heir, Henry sought an annulment, a decision that led to England's break from the Catholic Church. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, was a woman of wit and ambition, who played a significant role in pushing for religious reform. Their marriage, however, ended in tragedy when Henry had her executed on charges of adultery and treason. His third wife, Jane Seymour, provided Henry with his much-desired male heir, the future Edward VI, but died soon after childbirth. Henry's later marriages to Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr each revealed different aspects of his character: his vanity, his paranoia, and, in his final years, his reliance on strong-willed women to manage his declining health and political affairs. Henry VIII's children inherited not only his throne but also his complex personal legacy. Edward VI, crowned at the age of 9, was a precocious and highly educated boy, raised to be a staunch Protestant. His personal life was brief. He never married nor had children, but his reign was shaped by the influences of powerful noblemen who served as his protectors. His death at 15, likely from tuberculosis, left England in a precarious position. His will attempted to bypass his half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, in favor of his Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, but this decision ultimately failed, leading to the reign of Mary I. Mary I, Henry VIII's eldest daughter with Catherine of Aragon, had endured years of hardship before claiming the throne. As a child, she had been adored by her father, but after her mother's divorce, she was declared illegitimate and forced to live in relative isolation. Her personal struggles left her deeply devoted to Catholicism and determined to restore England to the faith of her youth. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain was politically strategic but personally disastrous. While she deeply loved her husband, he saw their union as a diplomatic obligation. Mary's reign was marked by personal sorrow, including 2 false pregnancies, which left her physically weakened and emotionally broken. She died childless, paving the way for her half-sister Elizabeth to take the throne. Elizabeth I, the last Tudor monarch, had one of the most enigmatic personal lives of them all. She never married, despite numerous suitors and political pressures to do so. Her relationship with Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, was one of the most talked-about romances of her time, but she refused to take a husband, declaring that she was married to England itself. Many historians believe that her decision to remain single was influenced by her mother's fate, and Boleyn's execution had shown Elizabeth the dangers of marriage within the Tudor court. Though she cultivated the image of the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth's personal life was filled with deep friendships, rivalries, and carefully managed court politics. Her ability to navigate these challenges contributed to her long and successful reign. Beyond the monarchs themselves, the Tudor court was a place of intense personal relationships, where friendships and enmities could make or break a person's fortune. Courtiers such as Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell, and William Cecil wielded immense influence, but their positions were always precarious. One misstep could lead to exile or execution. The Boleyn family, once one of the most powerful in England, was ultimately destroyed by Henry VIII's wrath. The Howard family, which produced two of Henry's queens, saw both of them executed for adultery. The Tudor era was a time when personal ambition, loyalty, and betrayal often meant the difference between life and death. The personal lives of the Tudor monarchs were anything but private. Every marriage, love affair, and family feud had profound consequences for England. Their choices shaped the country's religious direction, political stability, and royal succession, leaving behind stories that continue to fascinate historians and the public alike. Even centuries later, the Tudors remain one of history's most compelling dynasties, not just because of their achievements, but because of the drama, passion, and complexity of their personal lives. Part 9. The Role of Women in the Tudor Era. Women in the Tudor era lived in a world dominated by men, where their rights were limited, and their roles were largely dictated by societal expectations. Yet, despite these restrictions, many women found ways to exercise power, influence politics, shape culture, and even rule in their own right. From queens and noblewomen to writers, businesswomen, and ordinary citizens, the women of Tudor England played a crucial role in shaping the society of their time. At the highest levels of society, queens and noblewomen wielded significant influence, sometimes directly and other times behind the scenes. The most powerful women in Tudor England were, of course, the queens, either as reigning monarchs or as consorts to kings. Each of Henry VIII's 6 wives played a unique role in shaping the political and religious landscape of the time. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, was not only a devoted queen but also a skilled diplomat and regent, successfully defending England from invasion while Henry was away in France. Her intelligence and leadership abilities were undeniable, though they were ultimately overshadowed by Henry's obsession with producing a male heir. Anne Boleyn, arguably the most influential of Henry's wives, was not just a queen but a political and religious reformer. Her rise to power helped bring about the English Reformation, forever changing England's religious identity. Even after her execution, her daughter, Elizabeth I, would go on to become one of the greatest monarchs in English history. Similarly, Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth and final wife, played a key role in promoting Protestant ideas and was instrumental in ensuring the survival of Henry's children, particularly Elizabeth, during the dangerous years that followed his death. But queens were not the only women who shaped Tudor England. Noblewomen held estates, advised rulers, and engaged in diplomacy. Margaret Beaufort, the mother of Henry VII, was a political mastermind who helped secure her son's throne and shaped the early Tudor dynasty. Mary, Queen of Scots, though ultimately executed by Elizabeth I, was a formidable rival whose claim to the English throne caused political turmoil for decades. Women of the aristocracy were often expected to marry strategically, forming alliances between powerful families, but many of them used these marriages to strengthen their own influence. Even in the lower ranks of society, women played a vital role in the economy and daily life. Most women were expected to marry, bear children, and manage households, but they also worked in a variety of trades. Women ran taverns, worked as midwives, and participated in textile production, an industry that was vital to England's economy. Some women even managed businesses in their own right, particularly widows who inherited their husbands' enterprises. Tudor laws often restricted women's property rights, but some, like Alice Claver, a successful London businesswoman, defied expectations and built substantial wealth. One of the most significant areas where Tudor women left their mark was literature and education. While formal education was largely reserved for men, some noblewomen received an excellent education and contributed to England's intellectual life. Elizabeth I was one of the most educated women of her time, fluent in multiple languages and deeply knowledgeable in philosophy, history, and politics. Mary Sidney, a noblewoman and patron of the arts, played a key role in promoting literature and was herself a talented writer. Emilia Lanier, one of the first Englishwomen to publish a volume of poetry, broke barriers in a male-dominated literary world. Despite these achievements, women in the Tudor era faced significant challenges. The legal system heavily favored men, and women had few rights when it came to inheritance, divorce, or legal disputes. Marriage was often a woman's only means of securing a stable future, and once married, she became legally subordinate to her husband. Domestic violence was common, and few legal protections existed for women in abusive marriages. Additionally, the threat of scandal was ever present. Women who were accused of adultery or impropriety often faced severe consequences, as seen in the cases of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, both of whom were executed for alleged infidelity. Religion also played a significant role in shaping women's lives. The Reformation brought new opportunities for religious women, as Protestant beliefs encouraged literacy and individual Bible study. However, the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII led to the closure of convents, which had previously provided some women with an alternative to marriage and a place for education and scholarship. Catholic and Protestant women alike were deeply involved in religious movements, whether as reformers, educators, or even martyrs. Women like Margaret Clitheroe, who was executed for hiding Catholic priests during Elizabeth I's reign, showed that women could play active roles in religious resistance movements. In many ways, Elizabeth I embodied the contradictions faced by Tudor women. As a queen, she held ultimate power, yet she had to constantly navigate the expectations placed on her gender. She was expected to marry and produce an heir, yet she chose to remain single, declaring that she was married to England. Her rule challenged traditional gender roles, proving that a woman could govern just as effectively as any man. However, Elizabeth was also aware of the limitations imposed on women in her time and often used her femininity strategically, playing the role of the gracious, motherly ruler to gain the loyalty of her subjects. Women's roles in the Tudor era were complex, shaped by social class, religion, and the political climate of the time. While they faced numerous obstacles, they were not passive figures in history. They were rulers, thinkers, businesswomen, and activists who left a lasting impact on England. Their contributions, though often overlooked, were crucial in shaping the Tudor world and beyond. Part 10. The Economy and Trade in Tudor England. The Tudor period was a time of economic expansion and transformation, shaped by changes in agriculture, trade, industry, and finance. As England emerged from the devastation of the Wars of the Roses, the economy began to stabilize under Henry VII, who took careful steps to restore financial security. His reign marked the beginning of a more centralized economy, with the Crown actively controlling trade, taxation, and commerce to increase national wealth. By the time Elizabeth I died in 1603, England had developed into a thriving commercial power, setting the stage for its future dominance in global trade. At the heart of the Tudor economy was agriculture, which employed the vast majority of the population. Most people lived in rural communities, where farming was the primary means of survival. However, the period saw significant changes in how land was used, particularly through the process of enclosure. Traditionally, farmland had been divided into strips that were worked by peasants under the open field system, but during the Tudor era, many landowners began enclosing their fields for sheep grazing rather than crop production. This shift was driven by the increasing profitability of England's wool trade, which became one of the most valuable exports of the period. While enclosure made landowners wealthier, it often displaced peasants, leading to social unrest and an increase in vagrancy. The government attempted to regulate the process, but the economic forces driving enclosure were too strong to stop entirely. The wool and cloth industries were the backbone of Tudor England's economy, fueling both domestic employment and international trade. England's high-quality wool was in demand across Europe, and the cloth trade became a major source of wealth for merchants. Cities such as Norwich, York, and Bristol grew into major centers of textile production, where skilled workers spun, wove, and dyed cloth for export. The Merchant Adventurers, a powerful trading company, dominated England's cloth trade with the Low Countries, modern Belgium and the Netherlands, particularly the city of Antwerp, which was the most important commercial hub in Northern Europe. However, as political tensions with Spain increased later in the period, England had to find new trading partners, leading to a diversification of its markets. The rise of London as England's economic hub was one of the most significant developments of the Tudor era. With its prime location on the River Thames, the city became a centre for trade, finance, and industry. The establishment of the Royal Exchange in 1565, under Elizabeth I, formalized London's role as a major financial centre. Merchants from across Europe conducted business in the city, dealing in goods such as wool, wine, spices, timber, and luxury items. The growth of banks and credit systems also helped stimulate commerce, allowing businesses to expand and invest in new ventures. Tudor England was increasingly involved in overseas exploration and trade, laying the foundation for England's later dominance in global commerce. Under Henry VII, England sponsored early voyages to the New World, including John Cabot's 1497 expedition to North America, which claimed Newfoundland for England. Later, under Elizabeth I, explorers such as Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, and John Hawkins expanded England's involvement in transatlantic trade. Although the Spanish and Portuguese were the dominant maritime powers at the time, England began competing for control of valuable resources, particularly in the Americas. The development of the triangular trade, involving the exchange of goods between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, began in this period, though it would expand significantly in the following century. Trade with the Ottoman Empire and the Mediterranean also grew, as English merchants sought new markets after relations with Catholic Europe became strained. The Levant Company, established in the 1580s, helped England engage in commerce with the Middle East, importing goods such as silk, spices, and precious metals. England also began trading with Russia through the Muscovy Company, which established economic links with the powerful Tsardom of Russia. These ventures were crucial in broadening England's commercial horizons and reducing its reliance on European markets. The Tudor economy also saw the rise of early capitalism, with increasing numbers of people engaging in private enterprise and investment. The traditional feudal system, where wealth was tied to land ownership, was gradually giving way to a more market-based economy. The gentry, a class of wealthy landowners, became more influential as they profited from trade, enclosure, and financial speculation. This period also saw the early development of joint stock companies, where investors pooled their resources to fund large-scale trade expeditions, reducing individual risk while maximizing profit. Despite economic progress, poverty and unemployment remained significant problems throughout the Tudor era. The rapid growth of cities, combined with the displacement of rural populations due to enclosure, led to an increase in vagrancy and begging. The government responded with poor laws, designed to provide relief to the needy while discouraging idleness. Under Elizabeth I, the Poor Law of 1601 created a system of local taxation to support the poor, laying the foundation for future welfare policies. However, life remained difficult for the lower classes, who often struggled to find stable employment and adequate food. Coinage and inflation were also pressing economic concerns during the Tudor period. Henry VIII's lavish spending and costly wars led to the Great Debasement, a process where the government reduced the silver content of coins to create more money. This resulted in severe inflation, causing prices to rise dramatically, especially for food and essential goods. Although later monarchs attempted to stabilize the currency, the effects of inflation persisted throughout the 16th century, affecting both the rich and the poor. Overall, the Tudor economy was one of growth, change, and increasing global ambition. While agriculture remained the foundation of daily life, trade and industry were becoming increasingly important, and England was beginning to assert itself as a commercial power on the world stage. The policies and economic shifts of the Tudor era laid the groundwork for the economic expansion of the 17th century, when England would become a leading player in global trade and empire building. Part 11. The Religious Reformation and its Impact. The Religious Reformation was one of the most defining events of the Tudor era, fundamentally transforming the religious, political, and social landscape of England. It began under Henry VIII, intensified under Edward VI, was briefly reversed under Mary I, and ultimately solidified under Elizabeth I. The Reformation was not just a matter of changing religious doctrines, it reshaped national identity, altered relationships with Europe, and influenced the lives of every English citizen. Before the Reformation, England was a Catholic nation, closely aligned with the authority of the Pope in Rome. The Church played a central role in daily life, from religious services and education to the collection of taxes through the tithe system. Monasteries were major landowners and centers of charity, learning, and health care. However, tensions between the monarchy and the Catholic Church had existed for centuries, with English kings often resenting papal interference in their affairs. Henry VIII's reign would bring these tensions to a breaking point. The catalyst for England's break with Rome was Henry VIII's desire for an annulment from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Catherine had failed to produce a male heir, and Henry was eager to marry Anne Boleyn, believing she could give him the son he needed to secure the Tudor dynasty. However, the Pope refused to grant the annulment, partly due to pressure from Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, the most powerful ruler in Europe at the time. Frustrated by the Pope's refusal, Henry took matters into his own hands. In 1534, Henry passed the Act of Supremacy, declaring himself supreme head of the Church of England, effectively breaking England's ties with the Catholic Church. This marked the beginning of the English Reformation, as Henry dissolved monasteries, seized church lands, and redirected religious authority to the monarchy. The dissolution of the monasteries, 1536 to 1541, was one of the most dramatic consequences of Henry's reforms, leading to the destruction of hundreds of monastic institutions and the redistribution of their wealth to the crown and Henry's supporters. This move greatly enriched the monarchy but also disrupted the lives of thousands who had relied on monastic charity and employment. Despite these sweeping changes, Henry remained doctrinally conservative, maintaining many traditional Catholic beliefs while rejecting papal authority. However, after Henry's death in 1547, his son, Edward VI, pushed England further toward Protestantism. Under Edward's regents, particularly the Duke of Somerset and the Duke of Northumberland, the Church of England adopted more radical Protestant reforms. The Book of Common Prayer, introduced in 1549 by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, replaced the Latin Mass with an English-language service, making worship more accessible to the common people. Religious images and decorations were removed from churches, clerical celibacy was abolished, and key Catholic doctrines such as transubstantiation were rejected. These reforms established England as a firmly Protestant nation, but they also sparked widespread unrest, including the Prayer Book Rebellion of 1549, where traditionalist Catholics in the West Country protested against the changes. The death of Edward VI in 1553 led to the brief but dramatic reign of his half-sister, Mary I, a devout Catholic determined to restore England to the Roman Church. Mary reversed the Protestant reforms of her father and brother, reinstating Catholicism as the official religion of England. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain, one of the most powerful Catholic monarchs in Europe, further strengthened her commitment to Catholicism but also made her deeply unpopular among Protestants. Mary's reign is often remembered for the Marian persecutions, 1555 to 1558, during which nearly 300 Protestants were burned at the stake, including prominent figures like Archbishop Cranmer, Bishop Latimer, and Bishop Ridley. These executions earned her the nickname Bloody Mary, and rather than securing Catholicism in England, they strengthened Protestant resistance. When Mary died in 1558, her half-sister Elizabeth I ascended the throne, bringing a new approach to religious policy. Elizabeth was Protestant, but she understood that religious conflict could destabilize her kingdom. She sought a middle way, a religious settlement that would establish Protestantism while maintaining some elements of traditional worship to appease former Catholics. The Elizabethan religious settlement, 1559, restored the Church of England, with Elizabeth as its supreme governor, but avoided the extreme reforms seen under Edward VI. The Act of Supremacy reaffirmed England's break from Rome, while the Act of Uniformity mandated the use of a revised Book of Common Prayer, designed to accommodate both Protestant and Catholic-leaning worshippers. Elizabeth's religious policies were not without opposition. Catholic resistance remained strong, particularly among the nobility and in the north of England, where many still supported Mary, Queen of Scots, as the rightful heir to the throne. Pope Pius V excommunicated Elizabeth in 1570, encouraging Catholic subjects to rebel against her rule. This led to plots and rebellions, including the Rising of the Northern Earls, 1569, and the Babington Plot, 1586, both of which sought to overthrow Elizabeth and place Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. In response, Elizabeth's government cracked down on Catholic dissidents, executing Jesuit priests and punishing those who refused to conform to the established Church of England. Meanwhile, Protestant Puritans also challenged Elizabeth's religious settlement, arguing that the Church of England was still too similar to Catholicism. They demanded further reforms, including the removal of bishops and more simplified worship practices. Although Elizabeth resisted Puritan pressure, their influence would grow in the following century, ultimately contributing to the religious conflicts of the English Civil War. The Reformation had a profound social and cultural impact. It changed the way people worshipped, altered the role of the clergy, and reshaped the power dynamics between church and state. The destruction of monasteries reduced the church's wealth and influence, while the rise of Protestantism encouraged greater literacy, as individuals were expected to read the Bible for themselves. The King James Bible, commissioned in the early 17th century, was a direct result of the Protestant emphasis on Scripture. Perhaps most significantly, the Reformation defined England's national identity, setting it apart from Catholic Europe. The break with Rome led to long-term tensions with Spain and France, culminating in conflicts such as the Spanish Armada, 1588. At the same time, it encouraged England to explore new diplomatic and economic relationships outside the traditional Catholic alliances. By the end of the Tudor period, England had firmly established itself as a Protestant nation, with a national church independent from Rome. While religious tensions would continue into the next century, the foundations of English Protestantism were set during the reigns of Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. The Reformation was not just a change in religious doctrine, it was a revolution that reshaped the very fabric of English society, influencing politics, culture, and identity for generations to come. Part 12. The Legacy of the Tudor Dynasty. The Tudor dynasty left an indelible mark on England, shaping its politics, religion, culture, and national identity in ways that would resonate for centuries. The reigns of Henry VII, Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I transformed England from a medieval kingdom into an emerging global power, laying the foundation for the nation's future as a dominant force in Europe and beyond. The Tudors' impact was felt in monarchy, governance, religion, international relations, culture, and exploration, and their legacy continued to influence England long after Elizabeth I's death in 1603. One of the most significant aspects of the Tudor legacy was the strengthening of the monarchy. When Henry VII seized the throne in 1485, England had been weakened by decades of civil war during the Wars of the Roses, with the authority of the crown severely diminished. Through careful diplomacy, strategic marriages, and financial prudence, Henry VII consolidated power and restored stability, creating a strong central government. His efforts ensured that future Tudor monarchs ruled with unprecedented authority, establishing a new model of kingship that influenced later rulers. Henry VIII expanded upon this foundation, asserting royal supremacy in ways never seen before. His break with the Catholic Church and the establishment of the Church of England were monumental shifts in religious and political authority, reinforcing the idea that the monarchy could dictate not just governance but also spiritual matters. By declaring himself supreme head of the Church, Henry VIII redefined the relationship between the monarchy and religion, a principle that continued under later English rulers. His ability to wield absolute power, making decisions that reshaped an entire nation, became a defining feature of later English and British monarchs. The Tudor period also transformed England's government, creating institutions that would endure long after the dynasty ended. Under Henry VII, the Star Chamber was strengthened to control the power of the nobility, while Henry VIII's government became more bureaucratic, relying on skilled advisors like Thomas Wolsey and Thomas Cromwell. The Privy Council, which became more structured during the Tudor era, remained a key advisory body to the monarch well into the future. Parliament's role expanded significantly, particularly under Elizabeth I, who skillfully managed it to gain support for her policies. Though Elizabeth never allowed Parliament to challenge her authority, its growing influence would lay the groundwork for future constitutional developments, including the struggles between monarchs and Parliament in the 17th century. Religiously, the Tudors permanently altered England's faith and national identity. The Reformation, initiated by Henry VIII and later cemented by Elizabeth I, ensured that England remained a Protestant nation, separate from the authority of the Pope in Rome. The Elizabethan religious settlement, 1559, established a middle path that balanced Protestant doctrine with certain traditional elements, allowing for a more stable national church. This approach enabled England to avoid the devastating religious conflicts that plagued other European nations, though religious tensions between Protestants and Catholics would persist for generations. The Tudor period set England on a permanent Protestant trajectory, shaping its religious culture well into the modern era. The Tudors also expanded England's influence on the world stage, transforming it from a relatively minor European power into an ambitious, outward-looking nation. Henry VII established England's first official contact with the New World through John Cabot's 1497 voyage, laying the foundation for future English exploration. Elizabeth I actively encouraged maritime expansion, supporting explorers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh, which contributed to England's growing interest in overseas trade and colonization. Though England was not yet a dominant colonial power, Tudor-era exploration laid the groundwork for the later expansion of the British Empire in the 17th and 18th centuries. Culturally, the Tudor period saw a flourishing of the arts, literature, and architecture, particularly during Elizabeth I's reign. The Elizabethan age produced some of the most celebrated works in English history, including the plays of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson. The Tudor period also saw advances in music, poetry, and portraiture, with figures like Thomas Tallis, John Dowland, and Nicholas Hilliard contributing to England's artistic legacy. In architecture, the Tudor style, characterized by half-timbered houses and elaborate palaces like Hampton Court, became a defining aesthetic of the era. These cultural achievements helped establish England as a major artistic and intellectual force in Europe. One of the most lasting Tudor legacies was the stability and unity of England as a nation-state. When the Tudors first took power, England was still recovering from feudal conflicts and internal divisions. By the end of Elizabeth I's reign, the country had a stronger sense of national identity, largely thanks to the consolidation of royal authority, the success of the Reformation, and the defeat of foreign threats like the Spanish Armada, 1588. The Tudor monarchs created a more centralized and unified realm, paving the way for future expansion and development. Despite their many achievements, the Tudor era was not without its problems. Economic challenges such as inflation, poverty, and food shortages remained persistent issues, particularly in the later years of Elizabeth I's reign. While England had grown richer overall, many ordinary people struggled with high prices and limited opportunities. The harsh poor laws introduced in the Tudor period attempted to address social problems but often criminalized poverty, leading to further discontent. Additionally, the question of succession at the end of the dynasty created uncertainty, as Elizabeth I died without an heir in 1603. The end of the Tudor era marked a turning point in English history. With Elizabeth I's death, the throne passed to James VI of Scotland, uniting England and Scotland under a single monarch for the first time. This Stuart succession would bring new challenges, particularly as James I and his son Charles I struggled with Parliament in ways that Tudor monarchs had largely avoided. The seeds of future conflicts, including the English Civil War, were planted during the Tudor period, though they would fully emerge in the Stuart era. Nevertheless, the Tudors left behind a profound and lasting legacy. They had established a strong monarchy, a national church, a flourishing cultural scene, and an expanding global presence. The institutions, laws, and traditions they created shaped England's future, influencing everything from governance and religion to exploration and the arts. The Tudor dynasty may have lasted just 118 years, 1485 to 1603, but its impact endured for centuries, making it one of the most fascinating and significant periods in English history. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Tudor dynasty. From Henry VII's rise to power to Elizabeth I's golden age, the Tudors left an unforgettable legacy. If you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more history content. Until next time, keep exploring the past.